When I started work as a journalist in the North Country, there were newspaper reporters covering nearly every town's public meetings, many school board meetings, too. Today, many, perhaps most of those meetings go unstaffed. No reporter, just to tell the public what happened and to keep an eye on when local officials cut corners or say untoward things or operate against the public good. A call to strengthen local journalism from a lifelong North Country newspaper man on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street, Glens Falls. And Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. ClaxtonHepburn.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, April 24th. First up, a minor earthquake near Watertown was felt across the North Country yesterday afternoon. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, a 3.6 magnitude quake occurred in the Jefferson County town of Adams Center at 2:10 p.m. yesterday. People reported feeling the quake as far east as Elizabethtown in Essex County, up north in Brazier Falls, and as far west as Rochester. Sunday's minor earthquake came just a week and a half after another minor quake shook Jefferson County. There were no reports of damage from either quake. New York state lawmakers had the weekend off after they failed to reach an agreement on the state budget again, which is now 3 weeks late. Karen DeWitt reports.
Negotiations became a bit easier after Governor Kathy Hochul dropped one of her key priorities in the budget, an ambitious housing plan that would have built 800,000 new units over the next few years. Suburban lawmakers balked over a provision that would have allowed the state, in some cases, to override local zoning laws. And progressive lawmakers did not want to agree to any housing plan unless it included the tenants' rights provision known as good cause eviction. Senate Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins said earlier in the week that if the housing proposal was taken out of the budget, the legislature and governor would work toward achieving a package in the remaining weeks of the session.
I think that the housing conversation will go on because of the necessity of housing long beyond this budget.
The governor's other big budget priority is revising the state's bail reform laws to make it easier for judges to hold defendants accused of more serious crimes before their trial dates. The governor wants to get rid of a clause that requires judges to use the least restrictive means to ensure that someone will return for a court date. Senate Leader Stewart-Cousins says the agreement on bail is very, very close. Lawmakers still have to decide, though, on billions of dollars in spending, including priorities on education, adding more charter schools, raising the minimum wage, and whether to ban flavored tobacco products.
Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield? Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Senator Borrello, during debate, blamed all the policy items in the budget for the continued delay, and he decried the lack of transparency in a process largely controlled by the governor and the two Democratic legislative leaders.
People, in general, distrust government. They distrust this process because they're not part of it, and quite frankly, very few people are. Even those of us that are elected to represent millions of people are still not part of this process. But really what it all comes down to is the fact that there should be no policy in this budget.
Democrats agree. They say it would be easier if the budget were limited to just state spending items. Hochul, like governors before her, has inserted her top agenda priorities into the budget because that's when the executive has more power to get those items approved. Hochul has not spoken publicly about the budget in over a week. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
Newspapers all over the country are shrinking. So it might be hard to believe that not too long ago, a paper right in our backyard won a Pulitzer Prize. That was 2009, at a time when the Glens Falls Post-Star had grown in size and national stature. But now, today, its staff is a fraction of its former size. Its former editor, Ken Tingley, says that these declines at newspapers around the country present a danger to democracy and civic life. His most recent book is called The Last American Newspaper, and it chronicles the life of the paper he led for 2 decades. He joined Mitch Teich for a conversation about the role that newspapers and community media organizations play in everyday life.
Why was it so important for you to write this book?
Well, I think a lot of it is the recent times. I think the media has taken a hit, and it doesn't deserve that. You know, what we do in community newspapers and community media around the country is not what you see on cable news channels in prime time. That's entertainment. It has nothing to do with that. We're part of our community. We take this job very seriously. And I really felt that people were starting to forget the stories that we had did that made a difference. Things like the heroin series. We did a series on domestic violence after one of our editorial page editor had witnessed a murder where a husband had killed his wife in broad daylight at a convenience store. So I wanted them to remember that, this was the type of journalism that was being done, that was helping the community, that was keeping you informed. And more importantly, to ask that question, who's going to do it in the future?
So when I wake up in the morning, and I imagine you as well, I can turn on my phone and scan the headlines in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, listen to the news on the radio or on an app. How do you describe to people what's missing then from not having a robust local newspaper waiting on the doorstep in the morning anymore, or when they get home from work in the evening?
I think it starts with the depth journalism. I think there's enough weekly newspapers and digital components that you can piece together a lot of the information that you need if you're willing to go to 3 or 4 different sources. The great thing about a paper like the Post-Star over the years was it was one-stop shopping. You had everything there right at your fingertips. And I think the biggest thing that's missing now is, we used to do an in-depth story in every Sunday paper, and sometimes a huge 3 and 4 part series or a project, as some of the ones I talked about that really got people thinking about what was going on, and we're not seeing that hardly at all. And that's going to lead to problems. And even the other part is just not covering a lot of the community meetings. I found out this year that the town of Queensbury, where I live, is going to increase taxes 56%. Well, that's an amazingly large figure. If we had ever reported that when I was editor, people would have been coming out of the woodwork. They would have been screaming. They would have been calling the supervisor and the town council. They would have been showing up at meetings and protesting, and it wouldn't have happened. Well, they never covered that meeting, and so then no one knew it was happening. So we just saw it in our tax bill, and that's where it's going. You're going to your taxes are going to go up. You're going to fewer people are going to vote. And there's going to be a lot more problems in your community where politicians will be able to kind of do what they want.
Do you see any path forward for local news?
Well, yeah, you can get kind of jaded by all this. But I think there are still people out there fighting the good fight. I did a couple of speaking engagements up in Potsdam and Plattsburgh this past week. And, a couple of people say, hey, we're doing this. And there is some things. I think that we're going to go through a tough patch there. I think finding out what works is going to be, I don't see print as a long-term viable solution anymore, but I think there's going to be digital solutions. And once they can find a way to make money on that, and really the readers citizens have to be willing to open their pocketbooks and spend for the good quality journalism. Journalism is expensive. It costs a lot of money to do those stories. And, we shot ourselves in the foot for too many years by charging 25 cents for a copy of a newspaper. It's, just producing it probably costs $3. Of course, now it is $3. But, I think that's going to be a big part. You have to be willing to spend for those subscriptions. And, I always compare it to, hey, how much do you spend on your cable bill? How much do you spend on your phone? You should be spending that type of money on your news subscription.
Ken Tingley was the editor of the Glens Falls Post-Star for over 20 years. His latest book, The Last American Newspaper, is now available. You can hear the entire conversation with Mitch Teich on our podcast, Northwards, hosted by station manager Mitch Teich. We have more news all the time at our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Christopher Watts of Canton and Ben Sharon of Watertown. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.